I'm going to move for approval.
Second. Okay. Thank you. Resident questions?
I do have two on this one, and the first speaker is Michael Wilson.
Okay, Mr. Wilson, would you like to step up to the podium, please?
After him, it's Sean Murphy. So.
Good evening, Michael Wilson, 412 Eisenhower Street, Farragut, Tennessee. I would have been at the FMPC meeting to discuss my concern, but I was dealing with the COVID roller coaster at the time. So I just have a few questions regarding this item. In the town's write-up for this item, they state the required concept, quote, the required concept plan would establish what uses would be appropriate as ultimately stipulated by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen through the rezoning process. So does this mean that the Board of Mayor and Aldermen would be granted authority to tell a developer which uses under the C1 zoning ordinance paragraph B he or she could build? For example, does this mean that this board or a future board could deny, say, a church in a given PCD development or other type of house of worship or perhaps an indoor theater? Both of these are permitted uses within the uses and structures under the C1 zoning ordinance. So I guess that's maybe a question for Mark. Is that the authority that's being granted the Board of Mayor and Aldermen with this change?
Yeah, I can answer that. The PCD actually is a district that is different from most other districts. There is an inherent amount and things that the community can ask as part of a rezoning to plan commercial. So that's one of the things that it would give them a little bit more ability to do that as part of their evaluation of the project. The PCD is basically, there's certain things that are given to an applicant that wouldn't be available with a traditional type of development. In exchange for that, the applicant has to understand that they have to, consider giving back, and that may be, looking at some of the uses and whether they fit with the surrounding context and and that kind of thing. So it's a little bit different type of zoning district. That's why a concept plan has always been required.
Correct.
To rezone to that, just like town center district, same way. So this is really kind of language that's more consistent, frankly, with the intent of this district than the current language.
Okay, thank you. So I would note, if you look at the requirements under PCD, and in that section there's nothing that stipulates what kind of development, i.e. if you're building this kind of building, what use could go into that building. You're simply, as for an example, on Biddle Farm, we had 11 commercial buildings, I believe, the Aldi, and then the apartment complex. So I have a concern at what criteria that this board or a future board may use to make those decisions for one parcel versus another parcel when you go to that language of may. I'm not saying I object necessarily to the terminology change. I just want to bring it to the board's attention that I think there ought to be some kind of criteria so that when a developer comes to this podium and wants to develop something, they don't feel like, well, this developer over here, it was approved on that piece of property. I'm asking for a similar thing, but you're denied it on my property. That seems like we would be in a position where they might, look for litigation to try to get justice. To me, understanding the Planned Commercial Development District, it seems the primary reason for this change would be to deny specific residential use on a Planned Commercial Development District, as a developer could simply go back to C1 zoning, to go back and request a C1 commercial district rezoning if they wanted to build an Aldi's or a store or some other kind of complex. So they could also go to the appropriate office district to do that. So it seems like the big difference between PCD and these other districts is really the residential aspect. I know we've talked a lot about apartments in this last year, and my recommendation has been, and I've put it in the paper, and I'll bring it up here tonight relevant to this, if that truly is the intent that we want to limit or eliminate future high-density residential, particularly in the other areas of the mixed-use town center, there's a simple solution. Change the future land use map and remove those other areas from the mixed-use town center and simply state that Biddle Farm is our mixed-use town center. the C1 zoning ordinance and the other properties would not allow for apartments on them, with the exception if you reapproved a rezoning to R6, which has already been brought up in other areas and been denied. So I just wanted to relay that concern with the language of May. I'm a little concerned that after you all leave, a future board could come in and treat one developer one way, treat another developer another way, and then we have the potential for litigation. Thank you.
Thank you.
And second speaker was Sean Murphy.
Good evening. I'd first like to, this is Sean Murphy, 716 Bridgeport Drive. It's my first meeting in Farragut. I'd like to make a couple suggestions about procedure. One would be have public comment before the meeting and the beginning as opposed towards the later half of it. And the second request is, a lot of times people can't get here for a 6 o'clock meeting because they're not home from work. Someone wanted to be here and there's an issue on the interstate. And I would like just consideration of those two issues for the future. I'm here to speak out against specifically Ordinance 2205. I have been elected on a zoning commission in my previous state. And the thing that I found odd about this proposal, these four proposals, is that the town is doing them. And it's pretty customary for applicants to ask for a request to change a major use. And here, where the town is doing it. And I certainly, myself in my experience, haven't seen this very often, and I find it very odd. Don't know what anyone's intentions are. I've only ever spoken to one of you. But that looks bad. Whether it is or not, you folks know. And another thing that I found a little odd, but apparently is normal procedure, is that you've taken a first vote on these changes without actually listening to the public first. And as I understand that, as I found out from Mr. Wilson, that is normal. But usually, at least in my experience of doing this, if you want to make a major change to a town, and there's been a lot of turmoil here, there's been a lot of issues, there's a lot of concerns. We have an election coming up that's going to be contested, and residents have issues. And the best thing to do for the community is let people participate in the process before decisions are made. So I would leave it at that. I also wanted to throw a question out there which can be answered now or another time. Why the legal notice was filed for the next meeting as opposed to the first meeting where our first reading is tonight. It just, again, seems odd to me, and part of it could very well be that I'm from another part of the country, and things are done differently in Tennessee. There's a lot of things that are done a lot better here, which is why I'm here. But again, there's a lot of people that are moving here, people from other parts of the country, people who haven't been involved here before, and these perceptions, whether or not there's any malintention, which I don't know what you folks are, what your intentions are, but the perception is that these sorts of issues, I don't want to say makes you look bad, but it looks odd to people who are observing, and there may be a perfectly good reason for it. Sometimes you can do a great job, but the process doesn't work correctly, and I would leave it at that. I would like to see in the future with land use, and it's one thing that this town has needed for probably 20 years, which would probably predate all of you folks being involved with the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, is to have a professionally designed plan where we're not stacking and packing, we're not overbuilding. We have many examples where traffic, it can take, I've sat in it, it's taken a half an hour to go a couple blocks here. And I think that's one thing that this town has needed, and I'd like to challenge you folks now and the next Board of Mayor and Aldermen we're past the point where we should have done things a little differently. And what was done before you isn't your fault or your responsibility, but when you land with something like that, at least see what you can do to make the best of the situation. My big issue with this change is consistent with Mr. Wilson's comments. Changing shall to may, I don't like that. I think it leaves a lot of ambiguity. It can lead to problems. If an applicant wants to do something, then make that change then. But that's a big change. And I hope I'll be here at the next meeting, and maybe we can get some context of what folks are thinking about, since the vote was basically with minimal questions or concerns or comments. Thank you for my time.